Right, it is 1 o'clock. With the limited time that we have available this afternoon for this session on the Drinking Water Directive, we are going to get going. Just by way of introduction, this is one of the Insights Bites series of webinars. We've allocated an hour for the meeting. So we want to try and ensure that we get all of the content covered within that time. However, unlike most of our Insights Bites series, this is interactive in format, so there'll be an opportunity for you to chip in. Please do use the meeting chat and Q&A if there's any questions. I'll make sure, and Andy will make sure that we address those questions as part of the webinar. If there are any lingering questions that remain unanswered at the end of the session, we will do a follow-up to make sure that those questions are covered. Drinking Water Directive is something that we've had on the list of case files for the BMA for some time now. It is moving a step forward towards implementation in the European Union. And then, of course, we have the added complexity here in the UK of trying to understand what the intentions of the UK regulators are. They were very much a driving force behind the recast Drinking Water Directive when the UK was still a member of the European Union, but we're not quite sure on the direction of travel now post-Brexit, although hopefully today's webinar will shed light on that and many other aspects of materials in contact with drinking water. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to be leading this session and will talk us through some slides. Andy, over to you.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. If I could just get confirmation that everybody can see a slide showing the BMA and the title.
Yeah. Lots of thumbs up, so we're good.
That's great. Thank you. So, trying not to make this death by PowerPoint, but what this is I know that a few people have sat through what the Drinking Water Directive is, how it's going to work, what the timings are, etc. And indeed, the first slide I have is those key dates, but this conversation is more in line with what companies, manufacturers will have to do. And I've sort of localized this on our products and what you need to be aware of, bit of jargon and a bit more understanding of how manufacturers will have to deal with the Drinking Water Directive. I know that I've circulated the various documents, but I think this should give a better understanding of how this is going to work with number one, the assessment bodies, and number two, for manufacturers themselves. So cracking on. Just a few key dates. In April last year, it was published into the OJEU. So the delegated acts were taken in and they became regulation. 31st of the 12th, 2026 is the last date to place new product into the European market. Consider that this is Europe. UK is a different subject, but this is selling products into the European market. So the last existing national approval or products into the market with a national approval, existing national approval, will be at the end of 2026. The list of or the positive lists and the substances in those lists will be coming up for renewal, or the first ones that were actually added to those lists will be coming up for renewal in the 31st of December or the end of 28. So just take note that materials will need renewing on the list at the end of that period. And the last date, the 1st of the 1st 2027, so new products will have to be certified according to the new CE and the regulations in all EU member states. So you'll have to have the testing for new products before any time after that date. Just a couple of key dates as well. January 2025, ECHA published guidance documents for accepting materials into the positive lists. That's not what I'm going to cover today. But those guidance documents, and I will circulate this presentation, obviously, you will be able to link to those. We have circulated those via the website, but just another thing to look at, but that's about getting materials onto the lists. Mid 2026, we hope to have the guidance document completed. I've used the current draft, which was issued on the 29th of November last year, to put this explanation together. And I stress again, this is my understanding, and I am happy to be corrected on anything, and that's why this is an open session, really. Just a couple of other dates. The 12th of the 1st, 28, German national deviation of 5 parts per million per litre, applicable for all installations. So they have this national stipulation, which is allowed under the Drinking Water Directive, but you just need to be aware of that. But that will come in from the 12th of the 1st, so it's just something to keep an eye on. And the final date is 2033, beginning of 2033. All products placed onto the market must comply fully with the Drinking Water Directive, Article 11. So these are the regulations, rules for, so the numbers, and there are links there to the actual regulations, because I think sometimes it is useful to refer to the actual regulations. I think what we're going to talk about today is particularly 368 and 370, procedures and methods for testing and accepting final materials, and laying down conformity assessment procedures and what you actually have to test against. And that's what I want to go through today. But the regulations are there as well. The last one is of note today is 371, which covers what you have to actually physically put on the product or the paperwork accompanying the product. So when we talk about conformity assessment under the DWD, there are 4 different types of materials: organic materials, metallic materials, which are the main ones that we're concerned with, I think, within our products. And then possibly the 4th one, enamel ceramic materials that are in contact with drinking water. Cementitious materials can be some of the glues and bonding agents that are used as well. So really, as you'll see, all that will come into this sort of discussion, so I can hopefully explain the parameters where they sort of fit into our part of the world. So the basic requirements, what they're expecting, or what the Article 11 actually covers. If products can be non-destructively disassembled, the product is an assembled product. So I think we'll all agree that's most of our products. The conformity assessment bodies are the ones that can issue certificates. So it is, it's more or less a +1 system in simple terms, but I'll talk more about what that entails as we go through. The manufacturer, you as a manufacturer, will be required to do a declaration of conformity based on the testing that you've that has been completed, and the manufacturer will need to mark the product with the DWD symbol. which is quite large, and I think it's going to be a challenge to actually get that onto our products. But again, we can have a discussion about that later. There will also be annual inspection. So when I talked about the +1 system, that's what I mean. The requirement is that there will be an annual inspection to obviously keep an eye on the manufacturer's quality system, make sure there's no changes in there, verify the maintenance of characteristics of the product, so making sure that nothing's changed, and where necessary to withdraw, identify and seal to gain test pieces if reassessment is required, but that's in conjunction with the manufacturer. So that's a top level view of what's going to be required of manufacturers. So let's get into some mechanics of the actual test in itself and what's going to be required. So metallic materials, I'll cover essentially the metallic materials, and then also the other three types of materials come under a slightly different system. So there's two parts to this, the metallic and the other materials, if you want to call it that. So in most cases for us, the start of the process is to calculate the wetted area. And in our case, for metallic materials, obviously it's going to be greater than 10%. So it fits into category B. And you can see B there is fittings, ancillaries in buildings, in installations. So I think we sit quite comfortably in that, but there is C1. So some of those components may be metallic and may sit in C1. So components of product group B, and the sum of the surfaces in contact is less than 10%. So, and essentially what we're looking at is all these materials, if they're on the list, they must conform to what is on the positive list. If you're not on the positive list, you would need to get your product approval or your material, added to the list. And I think it's safe to say we've been advising try and keep your materials to what's on the list. But if you're not, you can actually add it, but obviously that's an expensive process. And one thing here is, I think you'll determine by the end of this that it's a costly process, and that's one of the concerns, certainly from manufacturers' sides. Metallic materials, the procedure for testing, and I'll cover the requirements in a short while as well. So the first thing is identification of the relevant substances. So meaning the metallic compositions of the final materials, and also composition of applied platings. So it's not just the material it's made of, it's how the plating is applied. So this is called a composition review. So the required information for the composition review, you need obviously the list of all the metallic components, including the composition. Now, simply put, that sounds really complicated, but essentially, if it's on the positive list, the composition will be defined in there, but you may still be asked by the assessment body for a breakdown of what that material is. Any lists of, and just to reiterate that this is the materials in contact with the water channel. So it's the actual components that touch or contact the water or the wetted area. You'll need to supply any solders that have been used in the materials that could be encroaching into the water pathway. And there's also a detailed description of applied impregnations or organic coatings. Now, I don't think that's prevalent, but it's something to be aware of. For example, if there's a hole in the casting and you've used something to fill it, then that needs actually declaring as well. And further, the detailed description of applied plating processes. So information about the process type, electroplating, galvanizing, whichever the process is. Now, it may be that the process is on the outside of the product, but there could be remnants inside the product. So therefore, you have to declare everything that you do into that product. The types of anodes or etc. that are used in the plating. So understanding your plating process. Any measures to protect the wetted surfaces. So if you use an organic material to protect it during the plating process, you need to declare those because they may leave a residue and fall into the to another category of material. And then any other information considered relevant for the assessment of the composition of the final metallic material. So processing can change the requirements of the material. So when you present to the assessment body, they will want to know what you've actually done to that product. I think our products are fairly straightforward. They're not overworked. But for example, stampings would change the makeup of the material, so therefore it might become an issue. So you will be asked for that information and how you actually manufacture the product. Testing for metallic materials. Now, as we've said, all the way through this, I find myself asking the question, well, it's on the list, so why is there a concern? But I think we need to be aware that if there are abnormalities, etc., or the test house assessment body deems that there is more testing, I've just put there a little guide of the testing that is required. I have to say they do seem quite specialist, but just for reference, you know, the CU alloys, which is probably the majority of ours and possibly the stainless steels. There's the testing that they're going to be looking at if you ever wanted to look at the standards. And incidentally, at the end of this presentation, there is a full list of the standards that are referred to throughout so that you can just reference if you ever wanted to look at them. And so the material is looked at, the conformity assessment body will go through those metallic materials, and if they feel there is any more further testing, which I think in our case would be rare, so just to put your mind at ease, but as long as you're on the list, I think we're okay to go. I think where we might have testing issues is with the plating. Plated products will be tested for nickel release and nickel residue on the internal surfaces. And as you can see there, I've just put the little table that components in contact with drinking water are plated with nickel containing layers. So therefore, if it's in the pathway and it's going to be used for drinking, cooking or food preparation, there will be testing required. So we need to be aware that that could come up as a testing on your product. And I think whilst the metallic materials is fairly straightforward, you know, it's the brass, and as long as it's on the list. But I think we should all be aware that there may be testing required on the nickel, on the plating. Now, this has raised a little bit of a debate, and I just want to clarify a point that the test method described in EN 16058, I don't know whether people are familiar with it, but it's a 26-week test. Concerns have been raised purely from practical reasons that it's not a production control measure. So that it is under review. They're still looking at it, but that's the test method that is singled out. But they are saying that if further testing is required, and to check within process, then there is a nickel deposit test, and the principle of that test is that the nickel is rapidly stripped away from the product, and that solution is analysed for the deposit. So in other words, the test would be done on the water pathway. So any nickel would be stripped off that product in that process. But you would hope, certainly in our case, again, we try and avoid nickel deposit within water. And it has to be under the limit that's set in the annexes of the regulation. So I just wanted to flag that up. And as I say, that is in review. So acceptance requirements for this is the easy one to say is the compliance with the European positive list. If it's on the list, then all well and good. The other thing just to note that I picked out is the list does not, the positive list for metallics doesn't list stainless steel grades, but if they are included in the standards 10088 and 10283, they are accepted, but you won't find them listed in the Schedule 2, which is the list of metallic materials. For the platings, so if any test is required, simply put, CTAP, and you'll hear me referring to CTAP, and you can see it through the document. That is the figure that's listed in the metallic list for the solution in water after test. And it's quite simply that the CTAP figure has to be less than or equal to, sorry, I've said that the wrong way around. I apologize. The CTAP is the test result if there's any testing required. Empty CTAP is the figure that's actually in the list of metallic materials. Apologies for getting that the wrong way around. But it's just a comparison of what's tested should be less than or equal to what the figure is in that's listed in the annex. And as you can see there, I've just listed them out. CTAP, concentration at the tap, and the MTC tap as listed in the annex. So there's an evaluation then just against if there are any relevant substances. So this term relevant substances means certain platings and byproducts of process that may be required to be checked for. So it depends on the process, and I come back to the fact that you have to give all the material or the process and the plating. The reason for all those details is to single out if there are going to be any relevant substances that might be retained in the product that could cause contamination of the water. So that's the metallic check, which is, to be fair, fairly straightforward. If you're on the list, you're okay, and just be wary of your platings. I think that's what it comes down to. So that's the straightforward one. Moving on to non-metallic materials. Is it worth pausing for any questions before I get into the non-metallic materials? Does anybody have any quick questions that they'd like to fire on the metallic verification? John? Are you talking, John, or? Are you there, John? I assume you've got a problem with your mic, maybe? Or is it my end?
No, I also can't hear John, Andy. So if John can put his question in the meeting chat,
Q&A or the chat,
yeah,
John, then we'll make sure as we get you an answer.
If you carry on for now, Andy, and then we'll try and address that question at the end.
Will do. Okay. So moving into non-metallic materials, I think again it's not overly complicated, this, but I think when you start to get into the detail of the document, it's what I've tried to do is provide an understanding of the whole process, but I think you'll see that some parts are more relevant than others on our products. So I think the first stage of the process is you'll be asked as manufacturers to supply a breakdown of the percentage of materials that is in the water pathway. So you can see on the left there that that's broken down into some generic parts that would probably fit our products as a tap. And you can see that the percentage of the wetted surface has been calculated, estimated to give the wetted surface of the materials. And the table on the right, you actually add together the various, so you may have 3 or 4 components, but you actually add together the material so that it gives you a wetted surface of the material. So you can see there, plastics 1, 11.1%. And then there's a risk group attached to that. And I just want to explain the process of how you arrive at that risk group. So when you look, the corresponding product group is derived from the size of the connector of the fitting or ancillary with the pipe system and expressed by the ID of the piping system. So basically the bore of the water pathway is what groups these products. So if you look, for example, if you've got a wetted area or the wetted total is greater than 10%, it'll fit into B1 to B3. And if you look at B1, the ID less than 80mm domestic installations in buildings. So I think you can see there we naturally fit into that. And what you're actually looking at is the conversion factor in the third column there. So CF in DDM, because that then relates to the next slide, where you look at the conversion factor here, and if it's greater than 4, so excuse me for flicking backwards and forwards, but you can see this conversion factor there. You then go to the table. Well, we're not greater than 4, but we are greater than 0.4 and less than 4. So that's where risk group 2 is related to the risk group that you can see on the right there. So it's just a way of categorizing the product, but I just wanted to explain how you sort of get there. So you calculate your wetted surface, you have a percentage of the wetted surface for the material. That's then taken the conversion factor from this table, which then relates to this table, and we can see risk group and risk group 3, risk group 2 and risk group 3 are those percentages and where they fit. And what's the point of that? It's as simple as you then do a read across and it tells you what testing is required. A formulation review, relevant substances, screening, TOC, turbidity, colour, TON, TFN. I'll do the explanations of the abbreviations in a minute because I can't remember them all, and EMG. So it lists what product. I know that the table is very simplified, but I'll explain a little bit more. So, for example, relevant substances, it says, yes, testing is required on assembled product, component or test piece of the formulation. So once you've defined your risk group, the relevant regulations are 368 and 370, as we discussed earlier. And the certificates will be issued by the notified bodies. Now, pre-products, so for example, granulates and formulations, can reduce the testing, but it's going to be left to the conformity assessment body as to whether certificates for pre-products, such as pre-manufactured products, will require testing or not. And I think what that comes down to is mainly process of those specific elements. I think if you molded a product, for example, I think then the test conformity body may ask for testing on the product because you've changed the properties of the product by the molding process. So the migration may change, and it's down to the conformity. And this, by the way, this session will lead into hopefully questions that I can take to the test houses to verify that we've got this sort of right and how they are going to manage their own systems. They are still in that process. Most of the assessment bodies that we know are looking at this and trying to figure out how to work through it. And just by way of explanation, on product or component means that the individual product or component of an assembled product shall be used for performance of the testing. And a test piece of the formulation doesn't necessarily mean that you have to test it on the product, but you could test it on a separate sample. And I think the difference there is it's a lot easier to test a sample than it is on the product in most cases, because I think you have to bear in mind as well that a lot of these materials, when we talk about testing them, they will be done possibly in isolation, So it's not necessarily a case of testing the product as a whole item, if you see what I mean. It's more that you are testing the individual material pieces. I think, especially for our products, consider that the positive list for our products for the plastic materials is they're quite small components. This is where I get to explain what the three-letter acronyms actually mean. So reading across the table, so just very quickly going back, at the top there are the tests that could be required if the conformity assessment body deems them necessary. A formulation review, relevant substances, there's the test there. So this list is just describing which tests are needed and what the standards are. Then you've got the unexpected substances, so requiring a migration test. And I think that is the most likely one to be required by a lot of the conformity assessment bodies, screening for unexpected substances. Total organic carbon, threshold odor number, threshold flavor number, color, turbidity, and the EMG microbial growth test, as they are. So they are what could possibly be requested of manufacturers to test. As I say, I think obviously the formulation review is the critical one, which starts to break down what materials are required and whether they're on the positive lists. But the assessment body will, or possibly could, ask for all the tests. I think that's unlikely on our products, and I'm talking about opinion. I'm not talking about being factual in that. I just suspect, and hopefully you'll agree, that I think the top two are probably most of the requirements that would be needed, as long as the products are on the list for our products. When we talk about the formulation review and the relevant substance review, as I say, the assessment body will review those materials that you've supplied and listed. The complete formulation of the material has to be disclosed. Now, I found myself asking, well, if it's on the positive list, then that suggests to me that the complete formulation is already there. If it's a listed material, the complete formulation may be there, but it was pointed out to me that they do vary. And in that case, the assessment body may ask for those details. So you should expect to supply chemical names, brand names, chemical abstract service number, CAS number, what the function or the technological function of the item that you're actually about. I mean, I know it's fairly simple. It's an O-ring. We know what it does, but it depends on, I think, the applications for me as to whether these will be asked for. And more importantly, purity and impurities, which can change the actual material, how the material reacts in the water, etc. But I think the last two sentences are the most relevant for us. So just by expecting the worst, you're always covered. But I think for ours, if the substance is listed in the positive list, I think then you're covered, particularly for the percentages that we're talking about. And the listed drinking water materials and the condition of use as provided in the EU positive list. So that's just something to be aware of, that if you're within the positive list, there will be uses as well as just the material. So as long as you're within those parameters, I don't see that most of the testing that I'm just going to talk through won't be required. Or that's my hope. So this slide, after the test house completes the formulation review, they may ask for more information. And I just want to make it clear what testing and which standards you may be asked to refer to. So it's more for awareness, this. And also, just to mention the test pieces. A lot of the material tests, in theory, if it's covered on the list, it should require less testing. And I think where you may get more requests for information is particularly on the unexpected substances. So the test house may look at the product and find that there is some sort of unexpected substance due to the processing. So they may ask for a test for that relevant unexpected substance. And again, more for information, the explanation document does talk about mathematical modelling. So there is, in certain instances, the assessment body may look to do a migration model rather than a migration test, which sounds an easy way through, but you have to understand that or consider that some of the substances, the method or the mathematical method will overestimate the results. So you could get caught out and you end up being higher than the value that is required in the positive lists, or the allowed concentration that is allowed in the water. Just quickly, I wanted to summarize, and I'm sure you guys will be interested. So we've sort of talked about what tests could be expected, what information is tested, but the ultimate goal is to have your product passed. So I've just gone through, and for each of the tests that are listed in the risk group, I've just listed out the pass or the acceptance requirements. So starting substances of the formulation listed in the European positive list for organic materials, it's obviously used, the formulation has to be correct, obviously, and it has to be used according to the technical functions specified in the positive list and used within the conditions of use established in the European positive list. So when you look at the organic substance positive list, there is parameters that will be set out in there. So the material is approved based on an area of use. So it's not just about the content of the material. The theory there, I assume, is that the parameters of use could change how that material is migrates into the water. Relevant substances. These are, again, they're substances that are introduced into the water supply, but not directly from the material. It could be a process issue, or indeed, if you have a molded component in the product, then that would change how it works. So if you're required to do that testing, then these are the parameters that you need to conform to. So within the test, there is the migration rates are determined by the test, and they are converted into a concentration at the tap. The concentration at the tap is where the conversion factors that we talked about earlier come in. The conversion factors will basically lower and provide the result in a comparable figure to what is listed in the positive list and the migration values that are allowed for those materials. So there's a little bit more detail there, but in effect, what you're looking for is that you've done a test and your MTC tap or the C tap is the same as what is allowed within the migration test. For identified substances without a known MTC tap, so in other words, the MTC tap, there's a substance identified that is not in the migration list, then that would be allowed one, just get this right, parts per million per litre. So as long as you're lower than that, it's discounted. So I'm hoping that makes sense. And then unidentified substances, in other words, they don't know what they are, but there's something there, which I find hard to believe, but I think this, but it's individually, they're less than 1 part per million per litre of the unidentified substance. But if there's more than one, then you cannot have more than 5 parts per million of all those unidentified substances together. Quite a detailed description of the total organic carbon, but again, it comes down to the testing and the standard requires you to check at the 3rd migration period, 10th day of testing, the 9th day of migration, 31, the 31st day of testing. So these figures must be in line with the figure in the migration figures that are quoted in the annexes of the regulation. So they've got to be below the figure. So the result has got to be lower or equal to the MTC TAP. And there shouldn't be an increasing trend over time. So in other words, what they're looking for, as I've said at the bottom, it does discuss, so I'll put an explanation there of the rising trend and what that is classed as. So what they're actually looking for is a trend. So you've got to be less than the MTC TAP and no increase over the period of time within those parameters that I've listed there, which I will bore everybody to death. And then there's also a test done in warm, hot water migration test that could be required. As I say, you won't be asked to do every test for every product, but I'm just highlighting the tests that could be asked for so that you've just got an awareness of what people are talking about, or what the document talks about, I should say. Similarly, you know, the threshold odor and the threshold flavor, there's the parameters that are the pass fail criteria for that as well. These taken from the relevant standards, obviously, but I've just put the headline so that if you were looking at a test report, you would know what to look for. That's why I tried to single it out. I would imagine a lot of people in the room may be familiar with the test, but not necessarily able to interpret the result. So that's why I've just put this here so that you know what you're actually looking for, what's good or bad, put it that way. Again, turbidity, acceptance criteria is less than 0.5 NFU. Can anybody give an explanation on NFU? That's an oversight on my part. This is where I just checked that everybody's still awake. Anybody know what an NFU is? When I circulate the presentation, I'll actually look that one up and just make sure as I understand that, because it's not a term I'm familiar with, so apologies for that. And then lastly, one that discussing with a couple of test houses, this seems to be one that is causing quite a bit of debate in that they feel that this microbial growth is something that could probably be tested for in most cases, particularly when there's a mixture of materials. So these test pieces and tests for colonization, I feel that members may well be asked to satisfy for the product, for their products, because it's not, it's something that should be available for most materials that we use, but the risk, I think, is that you may well get tested on most products for this. And then finally, just the residual substances. So this is, it's not in the read across in the risk groups, but it is something that has to be considered. So the maximum quantity of residual substances, so what's left behind for organic materials, is set out in 367 and should be reviewed for the final organic material. So essentially the test houses will be making a judgment as to if there is a reason to carry out these tests based on the information that's been provided. So at the end of all that, I think a couple of things I just want to mention, which are perhaps there's a lot of detail there. So I have singled out all the detail, but I don't feel that every product will be required to be tested. One thing I should also reiterate is that products using the same materials, so in other words, ranges of products may, the assessment bodies will look at the materials across ranges and similar products. So I think if your material's been tested once, you're not going to have to test it for every product. And that's one of the benefits of the DWD and concentration on the materials themselves. You don't have to do a test for every product within a range. This is an assessment of the materials, and if the materials are used in the same way, the processes are the same, I believe that a batch test, if you like, well, it's not necessarily a batch test, but there will be reduced testing across a range of products. So you need to just consider that when you're putting products in for testing or assessment. And I think assessment is more of the correct word to be used here. The assessment by the test or the assessment body could lead to some testing, but it won't be everything that I've just listed, I believe, if that makes sense. So moving on, the last part, the final regulation talks about marking. So the declaration of conformity that you will produce will allow you to mark the product. And the intention of the marking is so that obviously suppliers, plumbers, authorities, wholesalers, retailers, and consumers can understand that that product is tested and meets the requirements of 370, which covers Article 11. The symbol shall be at least 5 millimeters high is the requirement. And if you look at the complexity of that design, I think getting that in 5 millimeters, you'd be doing quite well. This has been fed back, but it's not changed. They were looking to simplify it, particularly EDW. That was one of the first things they raised, but it's still not been changed. However, where the symbol of the minimum size can't be affixed, it should be on the packaging and the documentation or any technical and administrative documents accompanying the product. And just by way of definition, what they mean by documentation are any technical and administrative documents accompanying the product. technical documents are, for example, the user manual or user instruction, but not technical documentation. A price list or catalogue are considered as administrative documents. So just by way of explanation, when they say the documentation, I think a lot of products, it certainly won't be 5mm, but it's whether you're prepared to, I suppose, or you think your consumer would accept a larger mark. I think that's what it comes down to, as to whether you could put it on your paperwork or accompanying documents. So hopefully that's clear. They have tried to clarify, as I say, with the what documentation means. So I think hopefully everybody's comfortable with that. But I think it's quite a complicated mark. I know that there's various ways, and I think the word indelible is used, whether that's a sticker, but the idea is that it's visible on the product, and not necessarily, it doesn't refer to after it's been installed. And finally, I've referred to a load of standards throughout the document, so I've just summarised at the end of this. They are the standards that could be used to assess our products. But just to reiterate, I think the main crux of what we're saying, putting all this testing to one side, the main crux is that if your product or your material, sorry, is listed in the positive list, it's more likely that you won't be asked to do all these tests unless somehow you've physically changed, or the assessment body believes that you've physically changed the attributes of that product with regards to migration. So thank you for listening. A slightly different presentation than I know we've had to date, because they've all been about what the actual what dates, what it's all about, why they're doing it, protection of the water supply, etc., etc. Whereas what I've tried to do in response to questions of, well, what testing do I have to do under the Drinking Water Directive? So hopefully I've answered that within this presentation, or that's what I've tried to do, and at least given you perhaps a more readable document than the 100 and so document that is apparently the guidance document, which reads more like a novel. I think we're all very much more used to a standard that says thou shalt do this and you will do it properly, whereas the document, the guidance document, reads more like a novel. So on that note, if you've got any questions, I see there's a couple in the chat and in the Q&A. If I can't answer them, I do apologise, but I am I'm by no means an expert in this, but I've taken the time to read the documents and try. But I do want as many questions if you want to email me after as well, because I would like to now start talking to the test houses, but I wanted to talk to you guys first to give you an understanding so that you could ask the right questions. On that note, I'll shut up and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Andy. So that's more or less bang on time for the hour. I think we can carry on taking questions until everyone's ready to start peeling off the call, can't we? So I'll put a few questions to you. The other thing I'd say on top of Andy's presentation, there is a video on the members area of the BMA website of another presentation from NSF on the topic of the Drinking Water Directive from a kind of European test house point of view. So that might be worth a view. And also Lisa has done a briefing within BMA Insights that's worth checking out as a very much an overview. It doesn't get into quite the same depth that Andy's got into this afternoon, but it is useful perhaps to share with colleagues outside the technical function as well. So let's crack on with a few questions. Going to start with Paul Illingworth. Paul, you've got a series of questions there, so I'm going to ask if you can activate your mic and put them to Andy directly rather than me reading them out.
I'll check my mic's working first.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Ignore the first one, it's pretty minor. The second one, which is number one, it looks like the list, or they're aiming for the list to finish sort of mid-26.
Correct, yes.
So assuming that's the case, then you're not really going to be able to do much of a application before mid-26. One of the other questions is how long does all this take or likely to take? To me, it sounds like with all these various tests that could maybe happen, it could be 6 months for a product approval, which would then take you in, even if you were bang on early doors, you wouldn't get an approval till very early 27, most likely, especially with lab capacity and all that kind of stuff. How long do the approvals last? And is a reapplication just a paper thing, or do you have to go through all the testing again? I.e., can you just declare that it's the same as it ever was, or do you need to go and spend lots of money again? Speaking of which, what's the likely cost of an approval? Are the test houses indicated? And does it differ if the product is more complex than a simple one, i.e. a basin tap with a single lever valve, 2 hoses and an aerator is pretty simple, but if it's a pull-out kitchen spray tap with hot water and all that kind of stuff, is it going to be significantly more? And will like component level approvals exist rather than material? So, for example, if Kerox or Neopearl or whoever effectively approve their product and the combination of materials in it, can you just put that on the list rather than having to every time break it down to the tiniest material in the component to then be approved and approved again and approved again?
Okay. My next conversations are with the test houses. I've opened up the conversations, and they're still reviewing it. I know that Tom's just said that NSF did a presentation, but it doesn't cover the physical testing and the cost of that physical testing, because I think it's on a scale as to how much testing the test house deems is necessary. It could be a really quick process where everything's approved, it's all on the list, and they go, yes, all the boxes are ticked, and that's it. And then you've just got your period of to answer one of your other questions, your mechanical tests. The mechanical tests against Reg 4 will still be required. This is a material test.
And the mechanical test for other nation states, because obviously EN 200, for example, isn't harmonized. So no, before there would be like, ACS or whoever would have their own little version of what they require. But those would cease to exist, but there is no harmonized replacement for durability tests. So does that mean products in Europe just need a drinking water material approval and nothing else?
It's a good point. I think they are country specific at the minute, but they tend to follow the ENs. Whilst it's not harmonized, I believe they follow the ENs. And I believe that whilst it isn't harmonized, they tend to be accepted across the borders, don't they? And I think your most pertinent question, which we'd love to give a definitive answer to, is what are the UK going to do? Because
in particular, because for example, say I've got a BS 6920 approval on a piece of plastic now, or everyone's sharing the same approval on a piece of plastic. That's just for what now you can use it on lots of European approvals, but in the future, if DWD exists, then if I'm Celanese or whoever making plastics for water, I'll just think, well, I'll not bother doing a BS 6920 test because it's expensive and the UK is a very small market compared to the rest of Europe. So why bother? So that means that for every little bit of plastic or whatever that's in the tap, I'll then have to do an individual BS approval for, which effectively will mean, yeah, what's the point of a Reg 4 approval versus a drinking water approval? Because it'll be nigh on impossible because it'll just be so expensive to reapprove all the materials and time consuming.
And you're raising exactly the point of starting this chat now, Paul. So now that we've got the document, we want to understand, because if the UK is going to stick with BS 6920, is that going to be accepted as evidence for Europe? At the minute, it doesn't look like it will. But I think the test houses, so particularly the international approved bodies, are considering how to deal with that, but we don't have a definitive answer yet. But the net result and the word of warning, as I said at the start, the cost to UK manufacturers who are selling UK and Europe may well be higher, and well, will be higher because you're doing more testing, particularly if you start getting the requirements for the other testing that I've listed. If the test house decides that they do need more testing, then that who knows what the cost is. My initial discussions with a couple of the test houses have been that you don't really want the UK to accept the DWD because it's going to prove more expensive. And that was the initial conversation that I had, which worried the hell out of me, as you can imagine. So again, it's the next conversation that I need to have. And you're raising the right questions, Paul, that I want to sit down. I'll be honest, I don't believe that the test houses have had the full enough time to actually digest how they're going to handle this. And they're looking at this, and a lot of work is going on behind the scenes, but I don't have the answers. And I don't think they can give me answers, Paul.
I think
I can chip in there as well, Andy. I mean, the ideal world is mutual recognition between the UK and EU for both. I think that's pretty unlikely from an EU point of view. But the door has been left open in an answer to a parliamentary question, which we managed to get put to the Water Minister. The door has been left open by UK ministers on acceptance of DWD. So I think the best that we can hope for at the moment is continued acceptance of 6920 if you're just trading in the UK. And then if you've got a component or you're trading across EU 27 and UK, go down the DWD route, and that'd be acceptable in both markets. That's something we're really alive to. And the other thing that to say on this is, let's be honest, the test houses have some skin in the game here, and duplicate testing is actually probably in their interest. So we need to factor that in our representations as well.
I think, yeah, certainly from your members' point of view, they'll all be using a near pearl aerator or whatever part, doesn't really matter. But, there's got submaterials in that thing, but we don't want to have to be paying over and over again to to prove the same materials or components over and over again. Neoperl should be able to just test it and then put it on the list, or Neoperl's material supplier should be able to put themselves on the list.
I believe that the way it will work, Paul, is that the assessment of the material will include sub-components and even pre-molded approvals as well. That's my understanding. Can't confirm that, but that's how I've read and the conversations that I've had. So in answer to your question, I believe that will be the case, that you won't have to keep retesting every time.
I think there'll end up being a dead space in approvals. So say, for example, I'm selling to Ireland or whatever. If the list isn't going to get concluded till, I don't know, roughly mid next year, and then national approvals, you can't do them after that point, or after the end of that year, then there's going to be this gap between them actually publishing what the actual final rules are and the ability for anyone to then comply in time as everyone rushes to the labs. So I think there'll be a gap between when the date for the last possible national approval ends and the availability of everything being able to be done in the new way. And I think there'll be a crossover that there's dead space in.
Yeah, I think you're right, but the dates there, 2033, with your statement that you've just made, is not that far away. And I think the fact that we'll see. I can't answer the question. The principle is that there should be less testing because you can accept the materials from the list. That's the principle. But the practicalities are, as you say, Paul. If somebody decides that everything's got to be tested, then we are screwed. But also consider, just so that you're aware, the positive lists have already been agreed. So they are in place now.
Are they complete though, or are they considered
I just want to take a
complete?
few more questions, if that's okay, because we've got
Sure.
quite a few already lined up. I think, John, we've answered both of your questions, either in the chat, or I think Andy's already kind of covered acceptance of BS 6920. Ronnie has asked, do you think the UK will comply with the European Drinking Water Directive or set up its own rules based on the European DWD? Now, there was some rumours that the Scottish government wished to implement DWD in full. We've actually met with them, and what they've shared with us is that it's only the drinking water monitoring aspects of the DWD that they want to implement north of the border, not the materials in contact with drinking water, because that would be contrary to the Internal Market Act until the English government decides what it wants to do, until DEFRA decides what it wants to do on the Drinking Water Directive. So I think that's still not decided, Ronnie, at this stage. As far as we know from DWI, they want to stick with the status quo for UK regulation of materials in contact with drinking water.
Okay.
Anything to add on that, Andy?
No.
No. Michael has asked, is there going to be a directory of approved materials such as the one used by RAS? And if yes, where will we be able to find it?
That is the positive list, which are available through ECHA. When I distribute the slides, ECHA, I believe, hold the lists, but they are also at the back of the regulations. So there's links to the regulations, so you'll be able to get them from, get through to them. They are being updated. ECHA have issued guidance on how to get your material listed, and but the only thing is I haven't seen is the actual lists on the ECHA website. I'd refer to Timo. Timo's as close, if not closer, particularly on the European side. Could I ask you, Timo, are they available on the ECHA website? Could you find them?
You mean the drinking water guidance documents from ECHA?
No, the actual positive lists, because ECHA control the positive lists, don't they?
Yes, but the ECHA, the positive lists are published under the implementing and delegating acts. I'm not 100% sure which one. I'm mixing all of them every time again.
Yeah.
But they are published by the European Commission.
So they're only available at the back of, at the moment, the actual regulations, and the links for them, Michael, are in the presentation. Thanks, Timo.
Thanks, Andy, and Timo as well. Timo, you had your hand raised. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to try to give an answer to Paul's question.
I think I'll send Paul an email giving a bit more, because I tended to dot about, and then so I'll give you a bit more information, Paul, after.
Thanks, Timo. Stephanie has, it's not really a question, but she gives an idea of cost. Non-metallic materials are on average €10,000 per material. Been told by the test house that the DWD will be more expensive as it covers both chlorinated and non-chlorinated water, so the costs are going to be astronomical. Thanks, Stephanie, for that contribution. Obviously, issue of concern there. Yeah, presentations will be shared. Paul, did you want to come back in? Because I think you had some further questions that you wanted to put to Andy.
Sure. I guess the most simplistic one is that I would love to push this problem upstream to my suppliers. So if I say to them, okay, well, it just needs to be drinking water approved, end of. Are they allowed to do all the testing, do all the application on my behalf, make the declaration, then me just take off the back of their declaration in a cascading way and just say, there you go, all done? Or does it have to be specifically in my name? And do I have to get involved in a pseudo quasi way that I actually am making taps and buying brass?
No, my understanding is that the product assessment will be done by the assessment body, but they will accept material, what's the phrase? The supply chain certificates.
Yeah.
And that is the principle of this. So if it's on the positive list and it's been tested and approved, you shouldn't have to do any more testing, but you will need to pay for the assessment body to look at all that information so that you can provide a declaration of conformity.
Okay, thank you.
That's the principle.
Seems a little silly that if they've done the testing themselves, why, if I'm just claiming the same claims, they would want to check that the claims are the same.
Yeah,
because
it's
it's
just
their original test.
Yeah, I think that is the principle. It's the unforeseen changes that the assessment body feels that you've changed the migration properties of a product, and I think that's going to be quite rare myself, Paul. But that's a conversation that I need to take away and have with the test houses or the assessment bodies.
I think the other one was is because we've seen like token tables and token diagrams here and there, but is there a complete example approval for a product? Doesn't particularly matter what the product is, just do start explaining it to people and start putting it in context rather than, like you say, a very dry, very wordy document.
I will look around. I don't believe there is, but I have seen it might be on the UBA website, so I'll take a look around, because there's something very close. That's where I pulled the examples from, you know, with the wet testing breakdown for materials.
I've seen things previously, bits of it here and there, but I just don't know if there's all of it in one piece and it explains it all, and or whether it's still relevant. If it was early days to do with UBA and no longer relevant, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, understand.
Thanks, everyone. I think that's all of our questions answered so far, Andy. I mean, this is going to roll on, isn't it? So we'll be touching on it in the technical meeting at Insights Live, and in all likelihood in some subsequent webinars as well. But thanks very much, everyone, for your participation. And as I say, check out those resources on the members area of the website and in the Insights publication, which should be in your inbox right now. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.